Welcome everybody, it's Lewpac here, back with another Albion Online video for you. Today we do have the 5v5 meta snapshot for the month of November. The meta snapshot where each month we take a look at the 5v5 meta in Albion Online, what's hot and what's not. And this of course mainly covers GVGs and Crystal GVGs, but there's a lot of spillover to Hellgates as well. Now with the big changes coming in January on the Queen patch, which I'll talk about in another video, GVGs will be replaced completely with Crystal League. So the future of Meta Snapshot is going to be a bit different. We will have the Crystal League Meta Snapshot, but I will incorporate an entire Hellgate section into future videos once the Queen patch drops. So the 5v5 Meta Snapshot will have the Crystal GVG section and the Hellgate section. For now though, we're sticking with the normal format of looking at the 4 sections of Albion, the tanks, the healers, the bruisers and the ranged DPS, and looking at their place within the meta. So without further ado, let's get on with the Meta Snapshot. So this month we do see some new contenders in the S tier meta, and actually some more versatility finally in healers. If you follow the meta snapshot, you'll have heard me talk a lot about how nature's been the only thing people have played for quite a while. But as we said last month, with people playing more and more stuff like Great Curse, the Heavy Mace, and even some one-hand Arcane, which we'll talk about in a bit, it's becoming harder and harder for nature guys to keep those hots up at all times. And we have actually seen a Holy Staff creep back into the meta and rise up the ranks very quickly. So we'll talk about that when we get to healers. But right now, the meta is pretty good. We still have this kind of sword-heavy dive meta. There's all tank representation from Ironclads to hammers to maces and even arcane. Range DPS is in a pretty good spot. Everything is pretty good, so we'll get underway with the meta immediately, and we'll just go through it and you'll see how varied it really is right now. So starting as always with the tanks of Albion Online, and straight in at number 1, as you'll see from the video we're using in the example, the Great Hammer has made a big time comeback and is straight to the top of the tier list. Simply because the comps that we've been seeing, the way everybody's been playing, there's just no cleanse anymore on teams, which means the value of the Great Hammer's tackle is insane. Even with the CC nerfs to tanks in the recent patch, they can still hit heavily, especially as some tanks are even pairing it with Hunter Shoes for that rush ability to get an even longer stun. You could also use Dreadladen Fighting, passive if you want to count those auto attacks and use a different form of mana management, but the Great Hammer combined with the Inertia Ring or sometimes the Geyser is proving super popular and super effective. Now, generally the only thing people can do to get out of it is Ice Block, so putting a lot of pressure on those DPSers with the tackle can often make them panic and pop that Ice Block, which of course is a 60-second cooldown and is the hardest defensive they have. If you can get those out early in your first tackle, you can really open up an engagement. So the Great Hammer is just super strong. It does have a couple of weaknesses though. It's hard to get in to somebody spinning Hurricane with a Quarterstaff. It's also kind of vulnerable to teams that are trying to use the Hellgate meta of Double Great Holy. Some guys are trying to use that in GVG, and it can be annoying for a Hammer user because you get bounced out when you're trying to tackle in. Other than that though, the Hammer definitely top of the tiers right now. Another shout out though is the one-hand Arcane. We've seen the Arcane tank sneaking back in. That Arcane bubble of course purges and silences in an AoE once it makes contact from the Arcane Orb. This is really good. It doesn't strip nature hots. It specifically doesn't affect heal over times, but it can remove everything else, such as Sword Stacks, Fury, Morgana's Capes, Cleric Robes. Can't remove Ice Blocks, but it has enough use. It can remove Protection of Nature as well if somebody's not running Refreshing Breeze. And the shield from the Arcane has got a big buff coming up soon, meaning it'll absorb even more damage, but for a shorter duration, which in a burst-heavy dive meta is definitely something to look for. People have been pairing it with the Judy armor for even more defensives, and just having that defensive capability of the shields on your front line helps you sustain even further as you go deeper. The Ironclad and the Heavy Mace are both still being represented, so we have 4 different tanking trees see play. Those are the 4 main weapons. There's a few other options as well. The one-hand hammer Mistcaller build isn't terrible, but we're not seeing a whole lot of it now. I'm told a few teams are planning on using it in the near future though, so we might see that come back. So the hot picks then, the helm option is kind of open for all of the tanks. Some are using Fiends Cowl for the purge, some are using it for the knockback. Some guys are using a cleanse, even a knight's helm. It's one of the most versatile slots. Judy helm's good, demon helm's okay. There is a lot of options you can use here. There is no correct option. To be honest, it all depends on what you're facing, so there isn't really a go-to helm. That said, you'll never not find a use for a Fiend's Cowl or a Demon helm. The chest pieces then, Guardian's armor or Judy armor all the way. Some people have used a little bit of Knight armor, but really that only works on the choke point maps and is much more situational than the other two. And for boots, Fiend Sandals are a very popular choice. Demon boots aren't bad for a quick escape when you're low on health. You go very, very fast with those. Scholar Sandals are still pretty powerful. However, with the hammers, I really do like Hunter Shoes. That CC boost from the rush ability can put down some really long tackles, particularly on the clothies, and cause them a hell of a lot of problems. Overall though, tanks are in a fantastic spot. There's so much variety to choose from, and honestly it's all about choosing the tank that best counters your opposition right now. It really is a game of rock, paper, scissors in terms of trying to get the right stuff to counter. So I advise tank players to bring a few different sets to a battle and give yourself a lot of options for tanking. So on to the healers then, and as I said, healers has been kind of uninteresting for a while, as it's just been this Druid staff with the Graveguard, Druid boots, Scholar Sandals forever. But now it does seem that Holy is making a bit of a comeback. The Redemption staff with that bouncing Celestial Sphere is being played simply because people are doing mass anti-heal and hot removal builds with things like a Great Curse, and just making it so hard for a nature to play. So a lot of people moved over to the Redemption staff. Now this is really good because you can fire off a Celestial Sphere as your frontliners engage, and it will bounce across them and just keep them going. Even when they're out of your range, the sphere will keep bouncing and keep healing. And it's actually a lot of healing, especially when you combine it with something like a Judy armor. It allows crazy sustainability in the front line. It's not without its weaknesses, of course. Being a cast time weapon with those generous heals and those Celestial Spheres, something like an Ironclad or even a Great Hammer can cause you a lot of problems by interrupting crucial heals. So it's not as versatile on the helm slot, because if you face an Ironclad, you pretty much have to run a Knight's helm. So we do lose one of those emergency heals in the form of Graveguard. However, people not against Ironclad have actually been using the Cleric Robe Graveguard build for a Holy and having good work with it. Or if you're getting constantly dived, the Ice Block is also an option. Personally, I'm not a massive fan of Ice Block on healers, because I think 6 seconds sitting in your Ice Block and not healing any teammates, even though it might mean that you survive, there's a good chance your team is either not going to survive or they're going to lose the momentum fight because you weren't healing for 6 seconds. So for me, it's Knight's Helm or Graveguard all the way, maybe a Cleric Cowl if you're constantly getting CC'd. But there's a few options. I'm definitely a fan of the Redemption staff coming in. I still personally don't think it's quite as good as Nature. There is some more changes coming in future balance patches. I'll do a balance review as soon as the changes are locked in. And I'll do a patch notes video on that. But for now, it's definitely playable, especially for people who are like, if you're running into comps that are just pure countering Nature, I'm talking things like Halberd, Great Curse, Heavy Mace. That is just awful to play with. They put on something like Cultist Sandals as well, and your heals do next to nothing. It's so frustrating, and half the time they're getting removed anyway. So it's definitely an option, and I'm glad to see people playing it, and it's nice to have both healing trees represented in the meta. So the hot picks, as I said then, it's Graveguard Helm, and then Druid Robe for Nature, Cleric Robe, or even maybe Mage Robe for Holy. People are still liking the Scholar Sandals, Mage Sandals are useful, Demon Boots are useful. There's a few options for boots. And then Limhurst Cape for energy management generally is the go-to. So the healers, I'm happy to see both represented. I'd like to see a few more different healers in play. I definitely think the one-hand nature is still a bit underrated, but with people running anti-heal against Druid, one-hand nature suffers even worse from this. So onto the melee DPS then, and we do still have this sword heavy meta. Similar to last month, the Claymore and the Carving Sword on the front line are absolutely dominating. We have seen the rise of the Halberd though. Halberd does seem to be creeping in to the meta because of its anti-heal capability and the fact that it's getting a bit of a buff soon in the form of 2 or more axes will be able to stack together. We may even see the return of double halberd setups, especially against the double healer setups that some people are running. So that could be something to look for in the future. Daggers, we've seen a few people running daggers in these burst and deletion comps. I just don't think they're as effective as other melee DPS, and spears have almost completely disappeared from play. It really is just the claymore, the carving, and the halberd that are seeing play. Things like bear paws are too easily countered. The battle axe is too easily interrupted. Things that could potentially be good just have too easy counterplay options. So it's really the things that are played are the super consistent ones. The hot picks for the melee DPS then. We've got a lot of them are running the soldier's armor for the Fury, but as we're seeing more and more purge, particularly these one-hand arcane tanks, then the Hellion jacket seems like a better option because you're doing better damage all the time. Obviously, if your Hellion gets purged, you need to be prepared to fall back. But having your soldier armor purged really limits your damage output wearing plate. So if there's a lot of purges, you just won't have the output to get the job done. So I personally think leather's better on the bruisers right now. I don't mind seeing the soldier's armor against, you know, things that don't have a ton of purge options. But if they are running a purge heavy lineup, which so many people are, it makes it so hard to justify the value from the soldier's armor. Usually one of the melee DPS will have to run the Stalker's Hood. This is to push through the kill pressure with that Mortal Agony ability, which is still a huge armor shred even post nerf. Other options include Judicator Helms, Fiends Cowls for either stunning or purging. Some people are even running Knight's Helm if there's a lot of movement disrupting abilities. And really, I've even seen some guys running Ice Block so they can go super deep and then turn on the defensive. But you do want at least one Stalker's Hood in your lineup because that is generally how you create your kill pressure. Melee DPS is, in my opinion, probably in the worst spot right now because of the extreme lack of options. I really would like to see some changes to daggers and spears to make them more widespread. Obviously, the dream meta for us is where everything is represented. And as we go further and further into Albion and people have more stuff unlocked to a high spec, we do have players that have the option to play everything. So a more diverse meta is better for everyone. But it's not the worst it's ever been. And I'm glad to see the sword guys getting some love after so long off the board. Finally then, the range DPS, and this is actually one of the good ones right now. There's so much variety. And as you can see from the tier list, top of the tier right now is so many things. Because of the prevalence of the nature, the Great Curse is still up there. The one-hand crossbow with its explosive power is still up there. The bow as well. And it's just, it's good to see so many different things playable at the absolute top tier of the game. Heavy crossbow is still playable just below, and of course this Great Fire artillery build that we've seen is super powerful, particularly on the choke point maps. I plan to do a build spotlight on that probably next week. I'm away for a week now over at Insomnia in Saudi Arabia. I'm doing some presenting work over there, so there won't likely be any videos for a week or so, but I'll be back quickly to keep you updated on that, and we will do the build spotlight for artillery fire as soon as we get back. Arcane is seeing play as well, but more in the tank position as we talked about during tanks. But I'm loving it as well. Permafrost, unsurprisingly, is still absolutely top tier. That Ice Shard is very overtuned. The Permafrost Prism itself, that big pineapple E, just absolutely shuts down clumps. If an enemy dares to clump against that, it's brutal. And there's options for more consistent value backlines, which is things like, you know, the Frost and the Curse. And then you've got the explosive burst backlines with the crossbow and the bow, stuff like that. The artillery fire is an absolute nightmare to play against if you're going through chokes or they've got solid lockdown. Pair that with the hammer and it's great fun. But it's just good that, again, range DPS players have so many options to be competitive in 5v5s right now. And it's honestly finding what suits your playstyle the most and what counters your opponent the most. But a brilliant spot for the meta. The hot picks then, in the Helm, it's Cleric Cowls, mainly Cleric Cowls in the Helm slot because honestly, it's just such a good defensive and it's a dive heavy meta. The squishy cloth guys are the ones they're going for. So it's Cleric Cowls are just the ultimate safety mechanism, especially that they are now that they can be used during a silence or stun. Other options though do include the Merc Hood or even the Royal Cowl for the more energy intensive Frost and Fire builds. So we have, you know, a few options in the helm. In the chest piece, Cleric robes, Mage robes, Druid robes for some DPS, Scholars robes, and Cultist robes, all seeing play. There's so many options for the chest piece, and again, it's super situational. If you need to be defensive or if you can get away with offensive is really a judgment call based on your team composition, how confident you are as a player, and how aggressively the enemy is targeting you. Shoes as well, Blink shoes, Mage sandals or Cleric sandals are your Blink options, and of course we've got those OP Scholars which have been nerfed a little bit on the run speed, but they still pretty much stop all CC, which is ridiculous. So you've got to have a defensive option on the boots and just keep away from these diving swords. You're likely to be kiting around swords the whole fight when you're playing a backliner at the moment, and the issue is you need something where you can still do damage. Heavy crossbows actually seen a fair bit of play as well, as I mentioned earlier, so one-hand crossbow is not the only option for you guys, but it's in a great spot. I really enjoy it right now. I've been playing a bit of crossbow, I've been playing a bit of curse, I've been playing a bit of fire for ranged DPS, so I'm getting some fun with everything. I haven't really done too much bow. I'm not really a competent bow player yet, and I still think the problems with the enchanted quiver need to be addressed for bows to reach their maximum capacity, but that's a story for another video. Overall then, I hope you've enjoyed this meta snapshot, and honestly, I would say the meta's pretty good right now. I'm hoping we have some real diverse setups and compositions, and the meta is really good as we go into Crystal League, because the Crystal League, the whole point of it is that it's a huge diverse system that everybody can take part in. And the more people taking part in 5v5s, the more new comps, the more interesting the fights are, and of course the better the balance of the matches is, because the more people taking part, the more chance you get matched with somebody on your own skill level, which is more fun for everybody. Losing isn't fun in Albion Online because it's a full loot conquest game, but you need to suck up a few losses to get anywhere anyway. So that's the end of November's Meta Snapshot. Hope you've enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe, and feel free to support the channel by spreading the word about the Meta Snapshot. And of course, as always, if you've got any thoughts or ideas with regards to the current meta, stop by and put it in the comments below, and I do read all of your comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time for another video.